All right, so as I mentioned, we are going to be discussing the configuration of Contact Center. Now, I will start off by saying this. We are not going to talk about any of the configuration on the Avaya IP Office side, okay? That should have been done already. That's not what today's training is about. I will be mentioning one basic thing with that, with the Avaya IP Office in just a minute here, but for the most part, we are discussing strictly the configuration of Contact Center through Chronicall/Avaya Call Report, okay? So to start off with here, I want to talk about licensing. The first thing I want to mention is, how do I license my agents? In order for me to be able to have an agent that is a Contact Center agent, I do have to assign them a license. So there's actually a couple of ways we can approach this. The first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to come here to where it says User Management. Under User Management, there's a section called User Licenses. Okay, and that's where we're going to go first, because in order for us to assign an agent a Contact Center agent license, they have to actually have other licenses first. Okay, in particular, real-time and agent dashboards. Okay, real-time and agent dashboards are additional licenses that you have to have first before you can assign that Contact Center license. And the reason why you have to have them is because multimedia or Contact Center functions with a lot of those same real-time and agent dashboard features. So it requires that in order for us to be able to do it. So if you come in here, you're going to see a list on the left-hand side here of all of your agents that are within the phone system. Okay, or all that you've set up here. At that point, we can see that they're licensed within the software. That means I can report on them historically. That's what license means. I can run reports on them. I can see them in cradle to grave. I can do recordings, that kind of stuff, if I have recordings. But from there, if I want to be able to have them be a Contact Center agent, I then have to make sure that they also have a real-time license. So let's take Adriana Taylor here. She currently is licensed within the software, so I can report on her historically, but I cannot monitor or report on her in real time at this point. So all I have to do now is check that box. Now notice, once I check that box, it does show me how many I currently have selected and how many I have left. Now I use the demonstration version, so I have 250 licenses. That's a fair amount. There's a chance you don't have that many, okay? At that point, I can see now that she has that real-time license assigned to her. Now I can go ahead and make sure she also has an agent dashboard license and the multimedia voice license, okay? Now, if you have also purchased the Contact Center web chat feature, which I don't know if anybody has that today, but if you do, if you want this agent to be able to see live external web chats, you can assign that license as well. Okay, so all of that is done here. You can go ahead and assign those licenses here. Once that's done, you can then come over here, I'll go ahead and close that, under the multimedia configuration section to licensed voice agents, and that will show you a list of those agents that I've selected. Now I've removed Adriana Taylor because my demo won't actually assign her a license, but if I had assigned her that license, I would now see her name in this list. Okay, so here are a list of my multimedia or my Contact Center agents. Okay. Any questions on licensing or assigning those licenses to agents at this point? Okay, great. Now, once those licenses are assigned, I can now come in here and configure a skill. Now, truth be told, you can actually configure a skill first. You don't actually have to assign the licenses the first thing. You can do that after you create the skill. That's totally fine. That's up to you. Okay. But I just like to show how to assign those licenses first. So now we can get right into building a skill, and then we'll talk about how to assign agents to a skill in just a second. Okay. So to do this, I come over here where it says Multimedia Skills. I open this up, and what's going to happen is I'm going to have this window open. Now you can see that I actually already currently have 3 skills prepared. Okay. I've got my list of my Contact Center agents here on the left-hand side. I can see the skills that they belong to. I can see what their rating level is per skill, or their skill level is per skill. We'll come back to talk about that in a few minutes. For now, what I want to do today is I want to build a brand new skill. So we're not going to interact with these that are existing. We're going to go ahead and say add skill, which would then give me the ability to go through and establish my skill now. Okay, Courtney. No worries, Courtney. I'm happy to send this to you for sure. Yeah, if you'll do me a favor though, just make sure that you send me your email so that I make sure that I send it to the correct email. That'd be great. Okay, cool. All right. Once I have my skill open and ready to go, I would say that the first let's say first 4 lines of this skill setup process are probably the most difficult. Okay, and they're really not that difficult, but it's probably the more complicated aspect of it. The first line is actually really simple. I'm going to go ahead and give this skill a name. What would I want to call this? Well, today I'm going to call this my orders skill. People are going to call in, they're going to request orders or whatever that might be. That's what this skill is for. So I'm going to go ahead and give it the name orders. Obviously, you're going to name it whatever you want for whatever skill it is. Okay, so I'll make it really simple. That's my skill name, orders. Now, at this point, this next line is quote unquote not super necessary, but it depends on your situation. Skill priority allows me to decide if this skill is more important than the others. As we've kind of already established, I'm going to cancel that for just a second here. As we've kind of established, we have additional skills at this point in time. That priority option or that skill priority option allows me to say that this skill takes priority over all of the rest. Now, really where that comes into play is when I have agents that are assigned to multiple skills. If I have agents that are assigned to multiple skills, I might want to set up a skill priority for my skill that is most important. And the reason why I might give this skill priority a higher priority number is because I want to make sure that these calls that come in for this orders skill take precedence. Okay. So what I might do in that scenario is I might leave all of my other skills at skill priority 0, and I might change this one to 1. Okay. A higher number indicates that this is a more priority skill. So when a call comes in, depending on how I have my routing algorithm set up, we'll talk about that in a second. When a call comes in, what will happen is this will then go through and take a look at that call coming in. It sees where it's supposed to go, which skill it's supposed to go to. We'll talk about how to do that in just a second as well. And from there, if this is a higher priority skill, it now knows that it needs to make sure that this call takes precedence over every other call that comes in. Okay. So again, skill priority is great if I have agents that belong to multiple skills. If I don't, then look, I can just leave that at 0, and calls that come in for this priority or this skill, if I've only got agents assigned to this one skill, then hey, it's going to go to those agents within that skill. It doesn't necessarily have to quote unquote take priority or take precedence over other calls. Okay, so keep that in mind. If I've established multiple skills and I have agents that belong to multiple skills, if calls that come in for the orders skill are most important, they should take precedence, then I'm going to go ahead and give that skill priority a higher priority. Even if it's just 1, the higher number is always the skill that takes precedence. Okay? Questions about that? Okay, cool. Yeah, I know it can get a little seedy. Like I said, this first portion of this is the most complicated aspect of this. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and leave it at 1. That's fine. We'll keep this as a priority skill for just a second, and I'll explain why in just a minute. Now I'm actually going to skip routing algorithm for just a second. We'll come back to this one. I want to talk about the skill routing identifier for just a second. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this ellipsis and open this up. And we're going to go ahead and hit add. Here's where I'm going to bring in the Avaya IP Office Manager for just a second. Okay. On the Avaya side, what you are going to do is you're going to essentially create an auto attendant. Now that auto attendant, when you set that up, essentially what you're going to do is you're going to take all the names of those skills that you're going to create here within the software, and you're going to give them each a number option. So let's say, for example, support is option number 1. Sales is option number 2. Orders is option number 3, right? You are going to assign a skill essentially to each one of those auto attendant options. Now, if I set up orders in that auto attendant, here in this skill, I need to come in here and where it says skill routing identifier, I need to make sure that I enter the name exactly as I entered it in the Avaya IP Office Manager when I set up that auto attendant. So maybe for orders, I called that order in the auto attendant. I just need to make sure that this, whatever I type in here, matches exactly as it matches in the auto attendant that I set up on the Avaya IP Office Manager side. This is how the auto attendant knows who to send that call to or which skill to send that call to. So if I have an auto attendant option called order or orders, depending on however I write it in the auto attendant, I need to make sure that this matches exactly. When someone calls in and they select orders, they hit option 3 to go to orders. When they hit that option 3, that skill or that call knows now to route to this specific skill because the skill writing identifier matches exactly as it matches in that auto. Okay. Again, I know it can get a little confusing. Any questions about that? Okay. Like I said, the most important thing here. Oh, sorry. It looked like someone was talking just a second ago, maybe.
Question.
And you might be on mute if you are talking. Sorry.
You can't hear me? Can you hear me?
And if you want to, of course, again, if you do have questions, you can send questions through that community chat box. Let me make sure my volume's turned up. Okay. Okay. All right. I'll keep my eye there just for a minute here, just to make sure if anything comes to there.
That's okay. Question I'm asking.
Again, main thing to keep in mind here is just make sure that whatever you type in here matches exactly as it's written in the auto attendant. Okay. Like I said, that's how it knows to send that call to this specific skill. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Courtney. I got that. Great. Now, I can actually have multiple calls route to this skill. Maybe I have orders English and orders Spanish, something like that, right? Whatever I set up within the Avaya IP Office auto attendant, I can have them route to this one skill. I would just need to come in here. If I had another one called orders Spanish, I would just need to make sure it's called orders Spanish here as well. And it will then know to route that call to this skill as well. Okay? That right there is probably the most complicated aspect of this. From here, we'll talk about the last complicated thing, and then we'll get into the easy stuff. Okay? The last complicated feature here, and again, it's really not that complicated, it's just kind of understanding. Courtney said IP Office auto attendant must be voicemail pro. Yes, you're correct. Yes. Sorry, yes. To make that clear, yeah. In the voicemail pro, I apologize. Yes. Okay. All right. Like I said, I don't get into the Avaya IP Office side as much with this, so I apologize for misspeaking there if that was confusing. So yes, just so everybody knows, I kept referring to the IP Office Manager. It's the IP Office Voicemail Pro. My fault. I apologize. Okay. All right. From here, the next thing we're going to do is we're now going to set up our routing algorithm. Now, there are really 4 options for this. Some of them are pretty basic in the sense of these are pretty common items. These are pretty common things that people work with on a fairly regular basis. There are a few of them that can be somewhat complicated, in particular the last one here, but that's one that's proprietary method for us. So I'll kind of talk about that in just a second. Let's talk about some of these other items first, starting with the first 3. Most idle, circular, and linear. Most idle. This one's pretty common. Basically, what happens is when a call comes in a most idle environment, what will happen is it'll look and see who's been waiting for a call the longest. Okay, so if I'm set up and Courtney is set up, right? If the call comes in, I've been waiting for 5 minutes and 2 seconds. Courtney's been waiting for 5 minutes and 3 seconds. Courtney's going to get that call because Courtney's been waiting longer than I have. Okay, so most idle, it just looks for the person who's been waiting the longest. Then that's who it sends that call to. Okay. All right. Next option we have is what we call circular. Now, I'm actually going to create a little bit of a diagram for this and make this a little bit easier on us. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple things here really quickly so I can kind of, like I said, illustrate this. Okay, let's do this. All right. So I've got 3 people here that are part of my skill. There's Blake, Stephanie, and Jane. Okay. Let's say I go through and I now rate each of these individuals a specific rating. So let's go ahead and say that Blake is a 10, Stephanie is a 9, and Jane is an 8. Okay. In a circular environment, what happens is this. A call comes in, and that call comes in and it looks for who has the highest skill level. That would be Blake. So he's a 10, so it's going to send the call to him first. Right? So Blake gets that call. Now, after Blake gets his call, once he's hung up or if he's still on the call, whatever, once that call comes into Blake, another call comes in. It then looks for who's the next most skilled, which would be Stephanie. She would receive that call. And then the next call comes in, goes to the next person, Jane, who is the next most skilled. She's a level 8. After all 3 of us have taken our turn, it then circles back to the top, going to me, then to Stephanie, then to Jane, then to me, then to Stephanie, then to Jane. So that's a circular pattern. It just starts with the first person who's most skilled. After they've taken their turn, it goes to the next most skilled. They've taken their turn, it goes to the next most skilled, and then it circles back up. Okay, so it's just in a circular pattern. All right. The next option is what we call linear. This is also fairly common. In a linear setting, it's actually pretty similar. But what happens is this. When a call comes in, it always looks again for who is the most skilled. Blake's a level 10, so it's going to come into him. Now, let's say Blake has taken his turn. He hangs up. That call is over. Another call comes in. In a linear pattern, it actually will always try to go back to Blake. Blake is the most skilled, so it always wants to try to send him that call first. If he's not available, then it goes to Stephanie. If neither Blake or Stephanie are available, then it goes to Jane. Okay, but it's always going to go try to go to the most skilled person first, right? And again, like I said, if they're not available, then it tries to go to the next most skilled. If they're not available, then it goes to the next most skilled. So linear always tries to go to the most skilled person first. Okay, so that's most idle. That's circular and linear. Circular and linear are also very popular. Okay. Now, this last option, I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to adjust this just a little bit. The last option that we have is what we refer to as highest skill or intelligent highest skill first. Okay. And this one is one that we have worked with. This is one that we have created. And this is actually kind of a rare option. Typically, what happens in a intelligent highest skill first situation is this is typically for companies that have agents that belong to multiple skills. Okay. Now remember, I set up. We're going to go ahead and say that there are two groups. So we've got sales and we've got orders. Okay. And I'm going to say that all of my agents belong to both of those. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and give each of them a rating here. And we're going to do this. Let's go ahead and say Jane's like a 5. Okay, something like that, whatever. In an intelligent highest skill first situation, what happens is it typically does kind of like a linear fashion. In other words, it tries to find the most skilled person first, always. But in intelligent highest skill first, what it also does is it takes into consideration the agent's other skills. If they belong to more than one skill, it doesn't just take into consideration the call that skill is for. So let's say, for example, a call comes in for sales. It doesn't just look and see who's the most skilled here. It also takes into account the other groups or the other skills that the agent is involved with or is assigned to. And then in that scenario, it does a quick mathematical equation and decides who to send the call to after that point. Now remember, I gave orders a skill priority 1. Sales is a skill priority 0. Okay, or I don't want to say it's bad. I'm just saying it's less important. Okay, so when a call comes in this scenario, what will happen is this. Let's say a call comes in for the sales group. It comes in, it sees, okay, Blake is the most skilled. However, as I mentioned, it takes into account his other skill as well. It sees that Blake is also a level 10 in orders. And guess what? Orders is my priority skill. So in that scenario, that call coming in for sales actually will most likely not go to Blake. It'll most likely go to Stephanie. Okay, and that's because it wants to keep Blake available for that skill skill for orders that's higher priority. It wants to keep available just in case a call comes into that group. Okay, really all it does is this. Okay, it adds those numbers together, and whoever has the highest skill, it keeps that person available for that priority skill just in case. Now, what if, let's just say what if, for example, let's say Blake and Stephanie are equally skilled in both skills. When that call comes in for those skills, it takes a look at both of them and it basically says, there's 2 people that are equally skilled in both skills. What do I do? Well, in that scenario, it actually won't send it to Jane. What it'll actually do is it actually just looks and sees who's been idle the longest. Right? So if Stephanie has been waiting longer than Blake for a call, then she's the one that will get that call. Okay, so what I just did here is what you see on that main page here. We are going to go through and give each of our agents a skill rating, right? So Ashley Scott, let's say she's a 10. Brianna Armstrong is also a 10. Cody Price is a 9. Jared Baker is a 7, right? So we can go through and give each of our agents that we want to assign to that skill a specific skill rating. First, by giving them a skill rating, it assigns them to that skill. Second, once a call comes in, it will then follow the order. Now, this scenario, most likely we would do an intelligent high skill first because we have agents that belong to multiple skills. But a lot of our clients strictly assign one agent to one skill, or an agent to one skill only. So that's just, of course, entirely up to you guys. But that's kind of how we have this set up. That's what intelligent highest skill first is. Okay. Are there any questions about that? Yeah, sure, Dominique. Let me explain that one more time. Dominique's question is they're not sure if they get the difference between linear and circular. Okay, so I'll just come back to this really quickly here, and I'll just show you. Let's just take this first column here. In fact, I just don't want to cause any confusion, so I'm going to go ahead and do this really quickly here, just so I can make this a little bit easier. Okay. All right. In a circular setting, what it will do is it'll come in and it sees that Blake is the most skilled. He's a level 10, so it's going to send him to call first. After he has taken his turn, okay, he's basically when that next call comes in, it won't send the call to him because he's already taken his turn. It then goes to Stephanie, and then after she's taken her turn, if another call comes in or when another call comes in, it'll go to Jane, because these two have already taken their turn. After it goes through all agents, it will then start over and circles back up to the top and goes to Blake at that point again, and then he'll have his turn, and then it goes to Stephanie, and then to Jane. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, cool, yeah. In a linear setting, it doesn't do that circle. It basically just always tries to go to Blake first. And unless he's not available, it'll always go to Blake. If he's not available, then it goes to the next most skilled. If neither of those two are available, then it goes to the next most skilled. But it's always going to try to go to Blake. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Sounds like it helps, so hopefully. Okay, great. Any other questions on call routing algorithms? Okay. All right, as promised, that was the most difficult aspect. Those first several lines are the most difficult part of this. From this point on, it's actually pretty simple. Okay, once we've got our skill name, we've got our skill priority, we've got our routing algorithm. I'm actually just going to go ahead, not that it matters really, I'm going to go ahead and set that as circular for now. And then skill routing identifier. Okay, from that point, it's smooth sailing. At least I think so. Okay. Here's the other nice thing I like to mention, guys. When I hover over each of these options, it'll actually show you a quick explanation of what that is. Okay. Language pack. Now, with language pack, this is actually great. It's really simple to work with. When you purchase the contact center module, part of setting up a skill is also setting up a queue for that skill. Each skill will have its own separate queue. Okay, so when people call in and they select orders, it'll go to the orders queue, and if there's nobody available, it'll put them into a queue and have them wait. But I have to configure that queue in order for them to be able to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is this. We're going to start with our language pack. Now, we do have several options here. Language pack, what this is referring to is this. In your queue, you will actually have some pre-recorded, predefined messages that clients will hear while they're waiting in the queue, or that they can hear while they're waiting in that queue. The language pack allows you to select which language you want those messages to be in. So we have a handful here. We have 6: English, French, German, Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish. Now, the issue with that is maybe you speak something else, or maybe you have a clientele that calls in that speaks a separate language from what's available here. Well, that's fine. You can actually open this up by clicking on this ellipsis tool, and you can actually add your own. So I can say add, and I can go through here now, and I can select the name of this. Maybe this is Russian or something like that, right? Or Mandarin Chinese or something. At that point, once you've named it, you can now see all of the messages that you have available to you. These are the predefined messages, and I can listen to them. If I want to hear what that sounds like, I can click play here. I can listen to it so I can see what it sounds like. If I don't like what it says or how it sounds, you can actually record this on your own. Right here, we can see what the message is, position in queue. If I click on this little eye symbol, this actually shows you what that script is. Your position in queue is, once I see what that script is, I can then decide to create my own. I can record my own voice or someone else, but in the language I want to use, saying that information there. So I might need to do some translation, obviously, but that's what the message is by default. If I do want to record a new message, you can do one of 3 things. You can, and this is probably the most common, you can click on this little phone icon here. What that actually does is allows you to find your extension. You can find your extension. Once you select that, it will call you. And then once it calls you, you can answer that and you can say start recording. And you can just record that audio into your phone. You can play it so you can hear it, how it sounds. You can re-record it, whatever you want to do. Once you're done, you can hit OK, and that's the new language, or that's the new message that the clients will hear when they call in. When it asks, or when it's going to tell them their position in queue, you'll have your new message there. Okay. You can do that with all of these. You don't have to, right? You can leave it as is. You can record, or you can re-record one or two of these and leave everything else as it is if you'd like. But these are your predefined messages, and if you don't like what they sound like, or if you want to do it in a different language, you absolutely can. Okay, so you can do that with the phone. You can also upload a previous file. If I have another recording file somewhere, I can. I've got these additional. You can see here the different file formats that you can use. Most often it's MP3 or WAV. Okay, but we have all these different formats that you can use. You can use one that you previously recorded. That's what that one is for. Or if you have a fancy microphone, I don't recommend doing this with like your computer microphone. If you have like a specific recording microphone or something like that, you can actually plug that in, and then you can hit this and you can record your message. And you can see what that script is right there. And as you read that, you can say it in your own voice, and you can record that with your fancy microphone. Okay. So language pack gives you the ability. You can leave it as is. That's totally fine. We have a lot of clients that do that. But we also have a lot of clients that say, you know what? I don't like that this message says this way, right? So being transferred to an agent, what is it that it says exactly? You are now being transferred to agent. I don't like that, right? I might want to change that if I want to. You're more than welcome to change anything here. Okay. Any questions about language packs? Okay. Awesome. Well, once I've got my language pack set up, right, that's where I'm going to go through and set up those default recordings. One of the other things I can do is I can actually create my own, right? Maybe one of the announcements I want to use isn't in this list. Maybe I want to add a special announcement. Maybe we've got a promotion going on. I don't know. When I call into my event, I always hear this thing that talks about, hey, did you know your dog can have heartworm or whatever it is? And they have a message that's about a specific new medication, right? So they have these kind of custom queue announcements. Well, you can do the same thing. Right here where it says queue announcements, I click on this ellipsis, it opens it up. Currently, there's nothing there, but all I have to do is drop this pin where I want that message to be. Now, I might fat finger that and think, oh, you know what? I don't want it at 10 seconds. I want it at 20 seconds. I want it at 10 seconds. All right, so you can adjust that manually here. Now, right down here where it says announcement, you do have some preset announcements that you can choose. Position in queue, estimated wait time. The difference is that you are telling it where it should play this message. Okay, yes, these are predefined, but you're telling it where it should play. Well, if I don't like any of those there, I want to create my own, I can click on this ellipsis here, and I can go ahead and say new announcement, and then I can do the same thing. Have it call my phone, upload something we've already recorded, or use my fancy microphone to record that from my computer. You can create your own messages, your customized messages to be in this list. And of course, then you would name it. And then from there, you could have it repeat always every minute and 30 seconds, or you can have it never repeat, or you can have it repeat once or twice, whatever you prefer. Okay. Now, there's one other option here, and that's QCB related. QCB stands for queue callback. We haven't talked about that yet. I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes here. So I'm actually going to skip that for now. We will return back to this. But just keep in mind, you do have the ability to create your own customized messages that play in the queue for the orders skill. Okay. There we go. Great. So again, I would just drop that wherever I want it to be. I'll add one just so you can kind of see what this looks like. Okay, and I'm going to have that repeat every minute. And I want that to be, we'll just stick with estimated wait time. Great. Hit OK. And that's what that looks like. Now I could go in here and I can now also add an additional message. We've got estimated wait time. How about position in queue? There we go. All right. There we have it. So we can see every time that a message is going to play in that queue. Now there is one other message, and that's this one right here. You don't actually have to use this one. In fact, a good portion of our clients don't. But I'll give you one scenario where this message right here might be helpful. It depends on where you're located. It depends on your region. What I might use for this message right here, keep in mind this message is actually one that both the client and the agent are going to hear. So what I might add here to list or to play is I might do a message that says, this call might be recorded for quality assurance purposes, right? So if you're recording calls, this is a place where you could drop in a message that says, hey, just heads up, this call might be recorded for quality assurance and training purposes. Okay, that's typically what that message is used for, because that's what plays to the client and the agent when that call is transferred to the agent. Okay, great. Got my queue messages set up, hit OK. Awesome. Now, I'll come back in here for just a second. Notice there's kind of this blank space in between messages. Not a whole lot, but there is some blank space there. What do I want there? Do I want just simple awkward silence? Or do I want to have some cue music? Okay. We do have some cue music that you can choose from. You can have silence if you want. That's a little uncomfortable, but you can choose from these pre-existing options as well. We have smooth jazz, snap, clap, whistle, and Vivaldi. You can hear all of those. You can get a sample of what each one of those sounds like. Okay, they're pretty common. Of course, you do, again, have the option to upload your own. Now, there are a couple things to keep in mind here. Mostly, the main thing I would mention is this. If you are going to upload your own music, please keep in mind copyright law, okay, or trademark, or whatever you call it. I think it's copyright. The point is basically like, if you don't have permission to play the music, just keep that in mind. That can get you in some trouble. So make sure that you have the permission to play the music before you put it in there. I would just add my mixtape so people can hear my awesome music. Just kidding, I wouldn't do that. But you can do whatever you'd like here. Okay, like I said, just make sure that you've got the permission to play it if it's something other than what we've got here. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to go ahead and say smooth jazz. There we have it. Great. Okay, so now that we've got our queue set up, we've got our messages, we've got our music, there are a few other things I can do with that queue. Okay. Before I do that, I will make sure really quickly, I didn't give you the opportunity to do this. Are there any questions about the queue messages or queue music? Yeah, great question. Courtney's question is what format for the music and announcement? Typically, that's either MP3 or I believe it's WAV file. I don't know exactly. I can do some research and find out for you exactly. But I believe it's WAV file. Okay, I'll make a note of that to find out for you, and then I can send you a message, Courtney. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to type that message out really quick. Okay, so Kat has some experience with this. She says it's WAV file. Yeah, that's what I would assume. So, okay. Yeah, and like I mean, the reason I question it just a little bit is obviously with our language pack, we can upload our own music in different formats, right? Not our own music, excuse me, our own messages in different formats. So if you've got something that's pre-recorded, in fact, you can do the same thing here, right? Like if I've got some music, you can open this up and you can see the different formats that you can use. So it kind of, same rule applies. So you have different formats here that you can use. But again, most often it's MP3 or WAV. Okay, but that's just if we're uploading our own from a file. Okay, all right, thanks for the clarification, Kat. Okay. Awesome. So a few other items with the queue. From that point, we then move on to a few interactive items. Number one is going to be queue timeout. Now, queue timeout is really nice, I guess, if you don't have the queue callback feature running. If you don't have queue callback, then this is a great option to use. Queue timeout basically prevents people from being in queue for too long. Okay. So you get to decide how long that is, but let's just say, for example's sake here today, I'm going to go ahead and say queue duration timeout is going to be 10 minutes. Once someone hits 10 minutes in the queue, I can then have that timeout to another destination. And the nice thing about this is this really can be anywhere. If I click in here, it'll show me my other skills. So I have other skills that are available. So if this is for orders, maybe I want that to go to my sales skill. Or maybe I have a voice mailbox set up for this kind of information. I can type in that voice mailbox or a short code or a phone number. Maybe I have an offsite answering service, right? So if it's in queue for too long, it can transfer over to another destination. And you get to decide where that is. Okay. So for this example, I'm just going to go ahead and say to sales, and then from there hit OK. Great. So if it hits 10 minutes in queue, it will then send over to the sales. And then, of course, in that queue, you can have the same thing set up if it's too long in cells, then it can go somewhere else, right? We have timeout, and then we also have queue overflow. Queue overflow, basically, if there are a few scenarios where this might come into play. If I do not have any agents enabled in skill, basically that means that there are no agents logged in. If I have no agents logged in, I don't want someone to wait in queue when there's nobody logged in, okay? Or if no agents are ready for the skill. They might be logged into the skills, enabled in the skills, but they might not be ready. They might, be in a do not disturb setting or something like that. If that's the case, if I don't have anybody available, either enabled or ready in that skill, then at that point, again, I can have it overflow to another destination. Again, same rule applies. I could have that go to cells. I could have it go to a voicemail box. I could have it go to, most likely in this scenario, I'd probably have it go over to, well, that's just me. I personally would have it go to a voicemail box, but you might have another skill set up that can perfectly manage these calls as well. Right, so you can have it transfer over to another skill, or you can have it go to a voicemail box or any other number that you want. As long as it's an actual number that it can go to those numbers. Okay. Now, digit actions in your queue messages, right? You might get to a point where if someone's in queue for a certain amount of time, you may want to give them the option to leave a voicemail. Or I've called in places before and it's like, hey, obviously you've gone through the auto attendant and then you sit in that queue for a minute and it might say, to leave a message, press 1, or to talk to an operator, press 0, or something to that effect. If you are giving your clients options to choose something to do while they're waiting in queue, that's what this digit actions provides you. If I say, press 1 to leave a voicemail, if they press 1, where's that going to go? I then need to come in here and enter that destination. So again, like I said, if I have a voicemail box set up, I'll just go ahead and put the short code there, 456, right? If they hit 1, it'll dial to that number. It'll go to that voicemail box. If I set something up for number 2, I can do the same thing. Or to speak to someone on our support side, press 5 or 2 or whatever it is, right? And then it can transfer over to that other skill. So if you are giving them options while they're waiting in queue, and you can say press 1 for this or press 2 for that, you do need to tell that 1 or 2 option where to go. Okay, so that's what digit actions provides me the ability to do. Okay. Max calls allowed in queue. Most of our clients don't need to use this, but we do have some scenarios where this is a good thing to set up. I'll give you an example here. We had a client a couple of years ago that was an off-Broadway theater. Okay, and that off-Broadway theater was having things like Hamilton or Dear Evan Hansen come. And what happens, obviously, in those scenarios is when people hear that's coming and they hear tickets go on sale Friday morning at 10 a.m., people jump on the phone at 10 a.m. and they try to get their tickets. Well, what happens when there's nobody available to take that call? Well, most likely they're going to wait in the queue. Max calls allowed in the queue basically allows you to add a cap. Okay. Now, for that theater, I think it was like 200 calls in queue, which seems crazy intense. But they wanted to max it at that point. Once the 201st call go into the queue, it then transfers to somewhere else, most likely a voicemail box. Okay, so you can decide how many calls should be allowed in the queue. Probably not going to be that high. I might say 20, right, or 10, whatever you want to do. And then once it hits that limit, anything past that will then overflow to this other destination. Okay, which again might be a voicemail box or another skill. Okay, great. Last option here, clear queue at the end of the day. At the end of the day, I don't want people still waiting in the queue, and I also don't want my agents to have to wait and answer calls after they're supposed to go home, right? So at 5 o'clock, we'll go ahead and put this in military time, or I should say universal time. I'm actually going to go put this at, we'll do it the minute or the second before it hits 5 p.m. There we go. Okay. At that point, what I want to have happen is I don't want calls to be in queue waiting when none of my agents are logged in, right? Or when I want my agents to go home. So at that point, if 16:59, which is 4:59 p.m., if it hits that point, then I want it to transfer somewhere else. Most likely, this will be an after-hours service or, again, a voicemail box, something like that. But that way, I'm not having to worry about calls waiting in the queue when there's nobody available to take those calls. And that way, I'm also not making my agents stay past their scheduled time. Okay. So I put that in, and then from that point, anytime that call hits 4:59 p.m. or any time those calls in queue hit at 4:59 p.m., then they transfer to somewhere else. And that's how I set up my skill. Okay. Now at this point, we can hit OK and be done, honestly. But we do have a couple other items to go through, and that's going to be queue callback. And I'll briefly touch on. I don't believe anybody has web chat today, but I'll briefly touch on web chat for those of you that might have it or that might be interested in it. Okay. Any questions on setting up a queue, or any further questions, I should say, on setting up a queue? Okay. All right. Great. Well, once that's done, again, like I said, I could hit OK and be done. But for those of you, which is probably a good portion of you, if not all of you, for those of you using the queue callback strategy, this is actually a fantastic tool. Queue callback is for companies that don't want people to have to wait in queue for too long. Okay, and obviously you don't want to have to be worrying about that queue either, right? What this allows us to do is essentially offer the client an option to receive a call back when one of two things happens. Either A, they're the first position in queue, or B, an agent becomes available. I'll explain those in more detail in just a second here. But when one of those two things happen, if that client has selected to receive a callback, then the system will then actually actively make a call back to the client. The client can then either, they might miss that call and it'll go to voicemail, right? But if the client answers, they're going to have a few options. They can press 1, which allows them to accept the callback, press 2, which allows them to snooze the callback, or press 3, which allows them to cancel the callback. If that callback is canceled, the system will no longer try to call them back. Okay. Now, with that queue callback, there are 2 options, as I mentioned. 3 if you count the no queue callback. I may not want this call or this skill or this queue to actually have a callback option. I may not have a need for it. Okay. But if this is a queue where I do expect calls to go into queue and a good amount of calls to go in queue for a long time, I'm going to go ahead and set this up. Now I have 2 options. The first is wait in queue, and the second is reserve agent. Let's talk about wait in queue for just a second. Now, I'm going to decide when this announcement is presented to the client. Okay, maybe that's 5 minutes into the call. If they haven't been answered in 5 minutes, maybe I want to offer them the option to receive a queue callback. Okay, it'll offer them that option. If they accept it, they will enter in their phone number, and then what will happen is they can then hang up and then go on with their lives. Now, in this wait in queue scenario, what this essentially does is it holds their position in queue. Let's say I was the 4th person in queue at that point. Okay. If I was the 4th person in queue, what will happen is when I get to first position in queue, or what sometimes people call on deck, the system will then call me back when I'm first position in queue. It will then give me those 3 options: accept, snooze, or cancel. If I accept, it puts me back into the queue. Does not mean I'm going to be answered right away. It just means I'm first position in queue. I'm the next person to be answered. So I still may wait 5 minutes. But I'm the next person to be answered. That's what wait in queue does. Once I'm first position in queue, that's when it calls me back. And then at that point, if I accept it, great. It puts me back in queue. I'm the next to be answered. If I'm not ready and I hit snooze, it'll then attempt to call me back again when I am after a certain amount of time, or when I'm first position in queue again. Okay. So wait in queue is great for companies that have shorter queue durations. So if my queue is never longer than 10 minutes, for a client, then that might be a good scenario where I might use wait in queue. Okay. The second option was reserve agent. This is typically meant for companies that have longer queue durations. If it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, anything longer than that, obviously, I might use reserve agent. And what this does is, again, it does the same thing. It gives the option to receive a call back. They'll enter in their phone number, and then what happens is when the next available agent is available, sounds redundant when I say that, but when they're available, it actually reserves that agent. It holds them, and it actually presents to them on their screen a message that says being reserved. Okay. While that agent is reserved, the system again will then call back the person, and they can accept, snooze, or cancel. If they accept, it then transfers them directly to that agent who's waiting. Okay. If they snooze, again, it'll call them back in roughly the amount of time that you set up as the snooze duration. And I'll explain that in just a second. Okay. But what happens is this connects them directly to the agent that has been reserved for them. So they don't have to wait in queue anymore. It connects them directly to the agent. Okay. So that strategy is going to be dependent on the queue that you have set up. Is it going to be a longer wait time for people? Is it a shorter wait time for people? Whatever that is, then you can make the decision of which strategy you should use. Okay. Any questions about that? I'm going to go through a few other things here, obviously, but any questions about that? Okay. Great. Now, I've mentioned snooze a couple times. You get the ability to select how long it should snooze. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say something like 20 minutes. Keep in mind, this is an approximation. There's no way I can guarantee that an agent will be ready in 20 minutes, okay, in exactly 20 minutes, right? So we do need to help people understand that this is an approximation. So in 20 minutes, if there is an agent available, great. It'll reserve that agent and it will make that call. If there's not an agent available at exactly 20 minutes, then it will wait until the next agent is available. It may be a little longer than 20 minutes. It may be quite a bit longer than 20 minutes. It kind of just depends on your situation. Okay, but that's an approximation. It just knows that in 20 minutes, it should attempt to call back the person if the scenario is correct, if it's the right scenario. Okay, so you get to decide that duration for snooze. It'll attempt at around that time to call back the person and either connect them directly with that agent that's waiting or put them back into first position in queue. Okay, great. Now, another important item of this is that this call is technically an outbound call. It's not the agent call, or it's not the client calling back into us. We're calling them, grabbing them, and then connecting them to the agent. So technically, this is an outbound call. So in that scenario, outbound dial code is important. We do want to make sure that this knows which number it should dial to get out of the system. Typically, that's 9. Sometimes it's 8, depends on your company, but typically it's going to be 9. You just need to make sure that you put that there so that when it makes that outbound call, it knows what the outbound dial code is. Awesome. Now, this next portion here is a little bit more in depth. Callback offer window. This allows me to decide how long that callback feature or that callback option should be offered to the client. If one of my messages, hey, if you'd like a queue callback or if you'd like a callback, press 1. In that scenario, I don't want that to be available to a client right before we close. I don't want that to be available to the client at 4:59 p.m. because if they or if they select to receive a callback and they're calling in at 4:59 p.m., my agents leave at 5. They're not going to get that callback, at least not today, and that callback is going to be pending all night long, okay, or something to that effect. So my callback offer window gives me the ability to decide how long that callback option should be presented to the client. So I would come in here and say something like 8 a.m. until I would say a half hour before we close, so 16:30. Right now, that's of course up to you. You can decide of when you want that. Maybe you don't want it. Maybe you want it to be closed an hour before you go home. Okay, it just depends on you. But that means that when a client calls in, if it's after 4:30, it will not offer them the option to receive a callback. Okay. Now, with that said, I mentioned earlier when we talked about queue announcements, I was going to come back to this. So let's go ahead and open this up. One of those options that I selected was, actually I didn't select it. One of the options I can select, let's say at 5 minutes, okay, roughly, we're going to go ahead and say at 5 minutes in, we're going to offer the option to accept or to leave a callback, okay? If this is after that 4:30 time, I don't want it to offer this anymore. So right where it says QCB related, that's when I'm going to come in here and put this at true. Okay, I don't want this message to play after 4:30 p.m. After 4:30 p.m., this QCB related looks at our callback offer window. And if I set that at true, it's going to look at that. If I leave it at false, it's not going to care. It's just going to keep presenting this regardless. So if I put that at true, it now knows, okay, only present the option to get a callback between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Okay, so if one of these messages that you set up is related to the queue callback, you will want to come here and make sure that QCB related is set to true. Okay, questions about that? So 5 minutes, we'll get that message. It's going to present in that queue. I probably will change that other one just a little bit so it's not playing right at 5. Maybe I put it at 6 minutes or something like that. Okay, so you can make those decisions. Right, there we go. Awesome, great. Once that's done, now I can go ahead and also set up my clear pending callbacks. Now, clear pending callbacks basically just means it's kind of along the same lines as callback offer window, in that I don't want callbacks to be waiting if there's nobody available. So clear pending callbacks by default is set at never. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear pending callbacks at 5 p.m., something like that. When my agents are no longer there, I do not want there to be waiting queue callbacks or pending queue callbacks. So at 5 p.m., I'm going to clear that. Is that inconvenient for the client? A little bit, because they're going to have to call back in tomorrow. But then the reason why I would recommend setting this up is because, let's take, for example, our situation, our company. We have agents that work, we have support agents that work kind of all hours of the day. We have people that go in on the East Coast at 5 a.m., which is 2 a.m. on Pacific Coast, right? And so if an agent logs in at 5 a.m. on the East Coast and there's still that pending callback, then as soon as that agent logs in, then that person on the Pacific Coast at 2 a.m. is going to get that callback, right? We don't want that to happen, especially if it calls their cell phone, right? If they put their cell phone in as the number that it should call. So we don't want those kind of things to happen. So we're going to go ahead and clear our pending callbacks at 5 p.m. That just means that if there are any people waiting for a callback still, it'll clear that and cancel that at 5 p.m. And then, yes, of course, they'll have to call back in tomorrow, but that's a minor thing compared to having someone get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Now, that's kind of an extreme scenario, but that's just kind of one of those things to keep in mind. So I can clear pending callbacks so I don't have people waiting when there's nobody available to take those calls. Okay. This next line, max callback attempts. This is in reference to callbacks that don't get answered by a client. So let's say, for example, a callback attempts to go to a client and they don't answer, so it goes to their voicemail. You get to decide how many times it's going to try. Default is 3, okay? But I can set that at fewer if I'd like to. Maybe I only want it to try twice. If it goes to that, if it tries to call the client twice and it goes to voicemail both times, boom, it cuts that off. It cancels that callback. Okay. So we're not going to keep trying that client. You can set how many attempts that you want that to do. Like I said, 3 is the default. You can put that at more if you'd like to, but typically it's fewer. So I would say something like 2. Of course, again, that's up to you. Okay. After those 2 times, it'll stop trying to call that client back. And like I said, it'll cancel that callback. All right. 2 last things here, at least for the queue callback. Attempt to guess return number. I typically would just say leave this at false. But you can put it at true. What this does, if I leave it at true, it takes a look at the number that the client called in on, and it doesn't, at that point, it basically will say, hey, would you like us to call you back at 801-930, blah, 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 blah. It's not going to, if I leave that at true, it'll try to guess that number. If it's incorrect, the client can then change that and say, no, it's this number, and they can type in the phone number, right? If I leave that at false, it'll just basically ask, which number would you like us to call back on? Right? And so that forces the client to type in the correct number. Okay. So you can do that if you want. If you want it to attempt to guess, great. If not, then I would just leave that at false and it'll force the client to type in the number that they want, to dial in the number that they want to call back on. Okay. The last option here is include estimated wait time. This does this in minutes. If you have a shorter queue duration, maybe it's only 30 minutes, and estimates that the time is 30 minutes, it'll just say, hey, your estimated wait time is 30 minutes. Right? That doesn't sound super bad. But if it's like 3 hours or something like that, whatever that is, your estimated wait time is 170 minutes or whatever, 180 minutes. There we go. That's correct math. Your estimated wait time is 180 minutes. That doesn't sound nearly as nice, right? So if you include the estimated wait time, you can put that at true and it'll tell them in minutes. If it's usually shorter, then that's great. If it's longer queue times, I would just recommend leaving that at false. Okay, but of course, I'm not telling you how to run your business. You guys can do what you want there. Okay. Any questions or any further questions setting up a queue callback? Okay, great. Well, that does it for most of what everyone has today. There is one other section, and that's the chat. Okay. Chat is an additional feature that you would have to purchase. It's not something that comes with Contact Center automatically. What chat does is, I'll kind of just show you a quick example of this. I won't do a full one, but I'll kind of show you what it might look like, right? So what would happen is if you have someone available, the chat option allows you to set up a live web chat option on your website. So if a client comes to your website and they see, click here to chat with an agent. Oh, great. I want to do that. I don't want to call in. I just want to chat with someone really quick. I do this actually all the time, right? So you can say yes. They can you can then put in your name and your email. And what would happen at that point is that would then go to a waiting agent. Okay. If you have the web chat module, I'll show you kind of what that might look like. So I'm going to go ahead and log into my contact center agent client. I'm going to go ahead and log in as Brian Freeman. Okay. And we're going to see a couple things here, but I'm going to focus really just kind of on one portion of this. Okay. And that is this. If I'm sitting here, if I'm Brian Freeman, I'm logged in, I'm ready to take chats, I'm ready to take calls, I've enabled all my skills, and I've enabled my channels. Okay. This is my web chat channel. If I have web chat, as soon as I click on that button, that means I'm available to take a chat. Okay. Now, what would happen in that scenario is this. Okay. We're going to go ahead and answer that call for now. So that's what it looks like when he gets a call. What about a chat? Well, if someone enters in to receive a chat, what would happen is they'd get this little window that pops up that looks like this. They can either reject or accept that chat. Once they hit accept, they can then start chatting with that person. Okay. I'm so sorry. Let's come back to my chat here. There we go. Right. And then that client might type something in, or he or she can type something in. Hey, how can I help? Right. So they can have a conversation with the person that's chatted into them. Right. And then they'll go back and forth. Okay. So there are a couple things to keep in mind with this. Most of the configuration is having to do with this right here. Okay. That configuration allows you to do several things. First, you have your invite header text. On here, you can see it here. By default, it'll say, click here to chat with an agent. That's the default. You absolutely can change that to speak to say whatever you want to say. Agents live now, chat with them, something like that, right? Now, if my agents are busy, if they're not available, maybe they've hit their max, they're on a call, they're already chatting with too many people, whatever that might be. If my agents are busy, I can actually do a couple things. All agents are currently busy. That's what it would say, right? I can change that if I want to. But if agents are currently not available, if they're all busy, then I can either hide this, which means that it would not appear on my website here. Okay, so that would be gone. Okay. Or you can actually offer them the option to send an email. Okay. If they send an email, that will go to my agents and they can then email back the client. Now there is another option, and that is the offer the chat queue. Chat queue it's a queue. It's just like a call queue. I just sit there waiting until an agent becomes available. Once an agent becomes available, then of course they would then see a messenger pop up and they can start chatting. Okay. So that's up to you. Typically, if that's shorter, I would offer the chat queue. But if it's going to be a longer time, I would offer an email. Okay. Or if they're all busy, then I wouldn't offer that option at all. That way I can avoid any web chat conundrums, if you will. Okay. What about when no agents are logged in? If there's nobody logged in, I don't want the clients to be able to send chats to someone who's not there, right? So when no agents are currently logged in, I can do one of two things. Hide the chat box, in other words, get rid of it, or offer them the option to send an email. So it doesn't put them into a chat queue. That's not an option if there's nobody logged in. Okay. The only options are hide the chat box, meaning they can't access it, or the other option is to have them send an email. And when an agent becomes available, they can see that email and they can send that email to. They can respond back to the client. Okay. Canned messages. A canned message, that's pretty simple, right? The nice thing here, and I don't have any set up for this, but if I'm on a chat, right down here where we have right here where we have templates, if I had some of these set up, I could actually have some pre-built canned messages that I can just click on there and I can select the reply that I would want to use. So I don't actually have to type anything. If I have a list of created canned messages, then I can just select the one I want to use. So let's go ahead and create one. I'll kind of show you. I'll hit add, and let's go ahead and call this greeting. Okay. So here's the nice thing I really like about this. I can say, hey, customer name. My name is agent name. How can I help? Right? So that's my canned message. And what would happen is when a chat comes in, we won't see this here, but in this template section, I'd be able to select that option, and that's what it would automatically send to the agent or the client. I wouldn't have to type it in. I just have to select it from my list and then go from there. Okay, so we can create a whole list of canned messages so that when people type in, if I can answer it with a canned message, I will. Okay. There is some chat widget customization, text customization, I should say. There are some default things that are set. So if the agent is responding, it'll say agent is typing. Maybe I just want that to say typing. Maybe I don't want it to say agent is typing. Or maybe I want it to say something like responding. Okay, whatever you want. Me, I could have that put as agent. Actually, no, I wouldn't want to do that. I'd probably just leave that as me. Because that way the client sees that it's them, and then the agent sees that it's them. Okay. If I'm the agent, it'll say me. If the client, it'll say me. Right. So that way I know which message is mine. Right. So you can go through this entire list of predefined widget text or chat widget text, and you can change anything there that you don't like. Okay. Once that's all set up, from that point I can hit OK, and now I've got my skill set up, okay, for my orders, and that chat widget or that chat, if I have chat, is also tied to that orders option, that orders skill. Okay. Now there's a couple other things, but for time's sake, I'm not going to go into those too much. They're just more on the more technical side. The one last thing I will say is this. Here's my skill here. We're going to see options for max simultaneous sessions. Okay. Most of them by default are 2. What that means is this: if I have voice, which is most likely what you have, and web chat, 2 means I can take a call and 1 chat at the same time. If I set this at 4, that means I can take 1 call and 3 chats at the same time. The higher the number, the more chat sessions it is, essentially. One of those is always going to be taken up by a phone call, so I can do 1 phone call at the same time as 3 chat messages. All right, so kind of just keep that in mind. I have the ability to create how many simultaneous sessions an agent should be able to handle, and that is agent specific. I know Ashley Scott can handle 4, but I know that Brandon Carpenter can only handle 1. Okay, so you can make those decisions at the same time. Okay. All right, that's a lot of information. Any questions about anything to do with our orders skill that we just created here? Okay. Well, everybody, if there are no further questions, thank you so much for your time. Have yourselves a fantastic afternoon.